This is who Rod Loyola praised. Fidel Castro, a brutal communist dictator. Now, Loyola's jumping ship from the radical NDP to run federally for Mark Carney's liberals. Mark Carney, embracing hard-left radicals who celebrate anti-capitalist tyranny.
Which leads the critical mass to surpass the imbalance of the capitalists to the oppressed working class.
If this is Carney's team, imagine his Canada.
The polls are drunk right now. Just a few months ago, Pierre Poilievre and his Conservative Party were on track to win potentially the biggest majority government in Canadian history, surpassing those of even Brian Mulroney and John Diefenbaker. But since swapping out Justin Trudeau for Mark Carney, the Liberals have risen like Lazarus from the grave to first place in most polls. Are those polls telling the truth? Which of those polls is most credible? How would those polls break down on a riding-by-riding level into actual seats in an election? I have ideas about most of this, because I mostly just borrow my opinions on the matter from the man who knows the most about it in Canada. Our guest today, Monsieur Philippe J. Fournier. Monsieur Fournier is the founder and owner of 338canada.com, a polling aggregator and seat projection website that has a pretty good record. Welcome, Monsieur Fournier.
Thank you, Derek. Much appreciate that introduction.
All right. Well, the polls have just swung wildly since the Liberals swapped out Trudeau for Carney. Parties have had big bumps before. Alison Redford for Jim Prentice, Brian Mulroney for Kim Campbell. And sometimes it has not worked. But sometimes it has worked, like when Jason Kenney was swapped for Danielle Smith here in Alberta. What's different this time is that Carney called an election immediately after becoming leader without giving people time to remember that they're still angry at the governing party. My question to you is it working, and can Mark Carney keep it up long enough for the rest of the campaign?
Well, this is a very good question. We do not know the answer, but we can go with the indicators and with the data to see, to have a better idea of how the next 4 weeks could turn out. Right now, there is no doubt that Mr. Carney is going through a honeymoon, which is not uncommon for new leaders, but honeymoons don't always last very long. The hope for the Liberals and Mr. Carney is that it lasts long enough. So again, we have 4 more weeks to go. But voting intentions are one indicator, one of many. And when we look at the other indicators, such as preferred leader, such as also the regional numbers, the mood of the country, they all seem to point towards a Liberal recovery. We don't know how long it would last, but it looks to be more solid every day we get into this campaign so far.
Well, I want to talk about that honeymoon. Matt Gurney at the line called it a sugar high. I think that might be an apt term. We'll see. But some polls are indicating most are indicating the Liberals are riding high. How high depends on what poll you're looking at. But a lot of the polls are showing that the vote isn't very solid. That it is kind of an artificial sugar high, if you will, and that it could, like a sugar high, crash as quickly as it came on. How solid is the Liberal vote right now? I know one of the indicators is how likely are you to stick with your party, or how firm are you in sticking with your choice? I think most polls have showed the Conservative vote is more solid, but the Liberal vote is high overall, but less solid. How soft is that kind of sugar high Liberal vote right now?
I would say your description is correct, that the Conservative vote is far more committed, and I would say even enthusiastic than other parties' vote. However, Derek, this is not new. We see this indicator at every recent elections, at least. Conservatives in this country are very committed. They're committed to the cause, to the party. And since Mr. Harper won in 2006, the party never had below 32% in a general election, whereas we have seen the Liberals swing all the way down to 19% and swing all the way up to 39%, and now we see them in the low 40s right now. So the conservative voters are generally more faithful to their parties, whereas the Liberals and NDP clearly are not. So how solid is this? Well, I could answer your question by a question. Is the NDP vote going to recover? And if the answer is like, well, I'm sure Jagmeet Singh can turn this around, then the Liberals are in trouble. But if you look at Jagmeet Singh's campaign and think, oh, they're done, well, that's good bad news for the Conservatives.
Well, you've now forced me to switch around the order of my questions. I'm going to go straight. I had saved this one for the last, but we're going to have to go to it now. I think that has been the big story. I think it's getting somewhat overlooked in the media talk and the punditry around this campaign. The Conservative vote has come down a bit, but much more movement has been from the NDP to the Liberals here. Just that the NDP vote has melted down. So, I have you here in your capacity as a man who understands polling and analysis, not as a pundit. It means there's a bit more meat when you talk about things than when I talk about things. But in a strange way, do you think the NDP are wearing the legacy of the Trudeau Liberals more than the Carney Liberals?
Well, that's fair. Although I am not certain that the NDP going down into single digits, because this is what we see right now, is as much because they supported Trudeau for almost 2 years. Maybe some of it is, but here's what we have to remember. Pierre Poilievre has had a permanent campaign since he became leader and has done quite well. Doing so, took the lead in every region. Even though he's not leading in Quebec, he is polling higher in Quebec than Erin O'Toole, than Andrew Scheer, and in some cases than the late stages of Stephen Harper. So he's been doing his part. But it's always been the case in this country that the anti-conservative vote is a bit higher than the conservative vote. It's just that the anti-conservative vote is split. And so you could see a majority with 38, 37%, or 39% rather, with Stephen Harper. Whereas, for the Liberals, they really have to hope the NDP goes down to win an election. And we see those ingredients right now. So the Conservatives, they cannot win in this context right now with the NDP solo. In single digits, perhaps winning a handful of seats, maybe a little more than that if you're optimistic for of their local MPs. But for the Conservatives to be at 38%, my podcast partner, Éric Grenier, mentioned that the last time the Conservatives had 37% in a general election and did not win, you have to go back 1 century. So this is abnormal right now. When the Conservatives have 38% of the vote, they win. It's just that right now there seems to be, as you said, this sugar high for the Liberals that's keeping them afloat and keeping the NDP very low.
Your answers are forcing me to mix up the order of all my questions here.
Apologies.
So we know the Liberals, they're on the sugar high, they're up in the polls, but it is, as is pretty predictable, most strongly east of Saskatchewan and in the less conservative-leaning regions of British Columbia. You're an Easterner. What is it that has Easterners viewing the political landscape so differently than Westerners right now? Besides, the traditional, there are East-West divides politically. There have been for over a century. But, there was this moment, I would talk with conservative-leaning people in Calgary here and, and in the country. And, they'd always say, oh, the Eastern bastard's going to screw us again. I'd say, well, no, the polls are pretty strongly. They seem to be coming around, at least this time, to be voting similarly, not as strongly, but similarly to people in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And now they're running back. But Westerners, there's a few pockets at Edmonton where perhaps a few Albertans have moved over to. But what is it that's got Easterners giving the Liberals another chance here, the way that people in Alberta and Saskatchewan are just not giving them any?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you a very satisfactory answer, Derek, on this, but I can look at some numbers and say that we in the East, in Ontario, in Quebec, in the Atlantic provinces, it's not like there's no conservative voters. But as you very well know, there are many flavors of conservatives. I mean, Doug Ford just won third majority in a row in Ontario. He calls himself a conservative. Many of his voters
we don't.
call himself.
We don't call him a conservative out here. But yes, in Ontario, he is considered one.
Yeah, so that's the thing. And François Legault, the Premier of Quebec, I mean, he would be, I mean, he's a nationalist government, but compared to precedents in the province and in the Eastern Canada, he would be a moderately PC leader if he wasn't for the CAQ. And of course, New Brunswick just switched red in the fall, but the PEI and Nova Scotia just swung hard towards the progressive conservatives. So there are many flavors of conservatives, and the fact that Western-style conservatives has not taken a strong foothold in those provinces, I'm not sure I can explain it. I'm aware it's a very different kinds of flavors of conservatism. Even in Alberta, we've got our factions here. But my question is more towards, why have Eastern conservative voters, at least in some numbers, or swing voters who are considering voting conservative, why are they willing to give the Liberals a fourth chance here, the way that Western conservative voters are just not even really considering it? Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had a good answer for you. I'm just looking at the numbers, but I would say this, and you may disagree with it, but there are a lot of voters, again, that voted for Doug Ford, that look at Mark Carney and they see a progressive conservative, a blue liberal, a more centrist liberal than, for instance, what was Justin Trudeau for a decade. Is that conservative enough for many Westerners? Probably not. But Mr. Carney is running to the right of his recent predecessors of his party. So the goal here is to make a big tent. That's how you win elections, right? And then you could say, perhaps Mr. Poilievre has not built a tent wide enough.
I'm going to put my theory to you.
Okay.
That it's not. There is a bit of policy. I mean, he's jettisoned at least. He says he's jettisoned the consumer carbon tax, and then there's capital gains. He's and he's dropping some of the more extreme woke language, at least in public. So there is some policy difference, at least on the surface, between Carney Liberals and Trudeau Liberals. My theory has been more that he's less annoying than Justin Trudeau. There's a term I've used on this show before, a German word, Backpfeifengesicht, which translates as a punchable face. Just when someone's got an annoying face and you just don't like them because of the way they look. And that a lot of people, maybe they want liberalism, they like the Liberal Party, but they were just sick of his face. Is it that Eastern and BC Lower Mainland and Island voters, they actually kind of liked the Trudeau government's record and its policies, but they just did like Trudeau's face and socks?
Oh, well, in the last weeks of Justin Trudeau, before he announced his resignation, his personal numbers were atrocious, and they were atrocious throughout the land, from coast to coast. And those numbers were not coming from one or two firms. There was a consensus that Monsieur Trudeau's time was done, and I do mean everywhere. When you look at the personal numbers right now for Mark Carney, he seems to be hitting the right notes. Again, he was prime minister for 10 days before he called the election, so we do not know really what a Carney government looks like. But the early campaign so far and the early vibes and the numbers that we see, again, we look at the voting intentions, but you also look at personal numbers. Monsieur Poilievre had strong numbers, but he was consistently compared with Justin Trudeau. Now he's compared to the new flavor, the Mr. Carney, who has, whether you like him or not, he has an impressive resume. And for a lot of people, it resonates. So you may have noticed, Derek, that Monsieur Poilievre, so far in the campaign, he's been in a better mood. He's been smilier. And I'm not saying it's all about this, but he spent the last 2 years as an attack dog in the House of Commons. And that works to a point. At some point, you have to run for the role of prime minister, not the role of the official opposition leader.
Mm-hmm. Look, 3 months ago, Poilievre was measuring the drapes for the prime minister's office, and today, maybe he'd pull off a minority government, but that seems to be, as the polls, at least as they're locked in today, there's a lot of campaign ahead. Campaigns change things, but he'd be lucky to pull off a minority. From the data you've analyzed, where has Poilievre fallen short? It's not all Carney and liberal magic here. There's the other side of the equation. Where do you think Poilievre has fallen short in his ability to connect with the times as we're in right now in going into April?
So if we go from east to west, the Atlantic Canada numbers that we saw in December, those were also kind of a sugar high. They were abnormally high. Poilievre was doing better than at the height of Stephen Harper's reign. And so we had an idea that historically it would get a little tighter. In Quebec, Poilievre has not moved. You saw the numbers, as I said, Poilievre and the Conservatives have gone down about 7 points in the last 2 months. But in Quebec, he's holding strong, and he could win 12 to 15 seats, which is not nothing. But where it hurts the most, it's really Ontario. When I crunch the numbers, at some point, and I know it fluctuates, polls and projections fluctuate, but at some point, I had 100 seats for the federal Conservatives in the province's 122 seats. That may have been a tad high, but even if you have 85 or 90, that's still a huge tally that would have destroyed the Liberals. And now I have the Conservatives more around 40 seats, basically identical score to the previous election. So it's like all this progress that Monsieur Poilievre has done since he became leader, this permanent campaign, this advertising campaign that worked so well against Justin Trudeau, all of this is just, we're back to square one for the Conservatives. Now, if I was Monsieur Poilievre and his team, this is where I would put the most efforts and resources, because they are swing voters. This is the important thing. Those voters in the suburbs of Toronto, in the GTA, I know it's a classic, but we'll say those GTA, there are 30 seats in the GTA. Doug Ford just won 28 of them. How come is Poilievre projected right now to lose most of those? This is where he has to improve his numbers. And if he does, then watch out, because you take seats directly from the Liberal totals into the Conservative column.
I want to finish, as I intended, talking about the NDP, because no one's talking about the NDP. And I guess for fairly good reason, except the only reason to talk about them is what happened to them. I cannot think of a single announcement. I was going to say I can't think of a single announcement that Singh has made this election, except I do recall he said something about we're going to end corporate grocery stores. So I'm not sure what he's planning on replacing Sobeys and Safeway with, some kind of commune vegetable farmer's market. I'm not sure. But, really just not landing.
Yeah.
If you were advising Singh in the NDP campaign right now, what do you think it is they could do to get themselves, not in the race for the win, that's obviously wildly out of the cards, but to get them into the race to at least hold on to most of the seats they have right now? What can they do to get in this race?
I would advise them to look at what happened in the Ontario election in February, where the NDP vote basically tanked everywhere except where there were already NDP MPPs. They have to save the furniture. They have to have local campaigns, put resources in a dozen or maybe 15 seats and just throw everything at them because the survival of the party is at stake. They have to reach that 12-seat threshold to have more funding for research and for staff and stuff. And right now, they're short of this total in my projections. So I would tell Mr. Singh, forget the national campaign, or at least some of it. Do local campaigns because there's a wave coming, and it won't look good for you.
I'm going to close on a question I know you're not going to like. I'll be surprised if you answer, but I have to try for your best guess. And I know you're going to start with an asterisk saying, well, the polls are not how people are going to vote. It's how they would vote if an election was held, within like the 3 days that the poll was taken. I get that. Yeah. But there are trends, there are indicators, and it's not just how people say they're going to vote. It's on issues and personalities, things like that. If I put a gun to your head and make you answer the question I know you don't want to answer, what would be your best guess based on the trend lines today about how this election ends?
Oh, you're asking me for a prediction?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God.
And I'm not going to hold you to it because...
your viewers will.
I can have a prediction today, and I know there's a very high probability I'll be wrong. So you're not getting held to this.
Okay. If I were to say anything else than a Liberal win, I would have to give you strong reasons. If I just go with the data, which is what I do, and I think that's what my readers expect of me, I will tell you that unless there's a big outside event or a major fumble, not just somebody misspeaking, but just something major happening, the Liberals are headed for a fourth win here. What gives me pause is that sometimes the Conservative vote is a bit underestimated in the polls. I say a bit because usually in Canada, with rare exceptions like Saskatchewan, we're talking about a point or two. And here, a point or two more for the Conservatives would not save them. They would have to at least get well within range of the Liberal number to say maybe we'll get a ballot box bonus. But with a ballot box bonus in the right places, could the Conservatives reduce the Liberal to a minority or have the minority of their own? It's possible. But that's as far as I go. If right now you're asking me for what the landslide looks like with the data, I'm going to say a Liberal win.
That was a very good answer for a very difficult question that
thank you.
People would be very afraid of having thrown back at them. I appreciate that. Mr. Fournier, thank you very much for joining today. I appreciate your perspective and analysis. I hope we can call on you again at some point. Absolutely, and thanks for this. I appreciate it. Have a great campaign. Yeah. Oh, and before I let you go, where can people find you? 338canada.com is the website where all the numbers. 338canada.ca is my newsletter if you're so inclined to subscribe. Right. I strongly recommend people do. This is anything I'm saying is largely just doing my best impression of what Mr. Fournier does. He knows his stuff a lot better than any of the talking heads like me. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. All right. The sponsor of today's show is New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with silver and gold. Check them out at newworldpm.com. They're just a great sponsor of the Western Standard. They're going to do great work for you, and by doing business with them, you're helping support your favorite shows and writing on the Western Standard. Remember, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access past the paywall for all our content. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.